When nature wants to carpet a field around here, chances are she'll choose wild, low-bush blueberries.
And a few companions, and she sure does a beautiful job. I'm Elliot Coleman.
And I'm Barbara Damrosch. And if you'll stay with us for the next half hour, we'll teach you how to be masters of ground covers in your yard.
On Gardening Naturally. Barbara, much as I think I've learned about gardening, I'm always humbled when I come and wander through the woods. Mother Nature does an awesome job of landscaping.
Oh, yes, this is so beautiful. I could never do as good a job as this. But, you know, it's a good place to come for inspiration. For instance, I'm trying to put together some ground covers in several areas of our property, and I bet we could get a lot of good ideas right here.
Oh, I'm sure we can.
I mean, the forest floor is where you can really see ground covers in action. And they serve a real purpose here. You know, they're almost like a blanket that protects the soil.
Yep, and they prevent erosion.
Yep. Keep moisture in.
Yeah, and if you look over here, you can see they provide an absolutely ideal germinating spot for a little tree seedling like that maple.
Right, or like that little fir over there. It's almost like it's a living mulch.
Yeah, and the best thing to me is that it isn't homogeneous. They change according to the conditions. For example, obviously that knoll there is perfect conditions for bunchberry because look at it, it's just covering it.
That's right. Bunchberry is a low, very shrubby ground cover. It's actually related to dogwood. That's why those flowers look like little dogwood blossoms. And it can tolerate a fairly dry, poor soil, usually like some sun, which is why it's growing here on the outskirts of our driveway here where some sun comes in there. But, you know, it's being competed with by that grass that's further down towards the drive where there's more sun and probably a lot of water collects in that ditch.
And so it's different conditions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And over here, you can see that there are a lot of ferns having a great time. It's probably deeper, richer, moister soil over there.
And up at the far end where the false lily of the valley is, I mean, it's in flower now. Isn't that spectacular?
Isn't that beautiful? And the ground pine in and among the fern, that little low-growing evergreen ground cover is wonderful. There's a little clump of bluets over there, too. Some people call those Quaker ladies. You see those cropping up a lot around here.
And the starflower in full bloom now. Isn't that beautiful? It's one of my favorites.
Oh, those lovely little star-like white flowers and the five-pointed leaves on those little erect stems. Now, over there, it's still blooming because it's shady, but notice that the ones here, where it's a little sunnier, they've finished blooming.
Mm-hmm.
But look how they're growing out of this stump, Elliot. It's this little forest of them. You know, stumps and rotted logs are a great place for sort of nurturing wildflowers. Here's a perfect example of it.
Absolutely perfect, and you can't imagine a landscaper doing any better job than this.
Yeah. When it works, it really works. But, you know, sometimes you'll see a plant having trouble in nature, too. For instance, over there, there's some partridge berry, which you don't see that often. I'm always glad when I find it, but that patch has been looking terrible lately.
Well, that's because I cut down that spruce tree so we'd have a better view when we came out of the driveway. Right. And now it's getting too much sun and it's a little unhappy.
Yeah, it's getting very yellowed. So probably something else will take its place. You know, in nature, all these things are in flux. As conditions change, the right plant comes to fill that spot.
Well, now we have to landscape our yard, so you're going to have to think about finding just the right spots for the right plant.
That's right. I have an area right now where I need to put some shady ground covers. So I'm going to go try to read that landscape and see if I can figure out what's going to do best there.
When vegetable growers talk about cover crops, they usually have a very practical use in mind, specifically smothering weeds. And nothing does that better than a crop of buckwheat. Now, when I tilled up this field, there was a lot of witchgrass in here, and everybody knows how hard that is to beat. But buckwheat will beat it. And that's because it grows very quickly. This has only been here maybe 5 weeks. It has wide leaves, and it shades the ground totally. So it quickly grows taller than any of the other competitors, shades the ground, and nothing else will come in. Now, I sowed this very thickly by scattering the seeds broadcast and then just raking them in. And in no time at all, the ground was totally covered, and there isn't a single weed underneath here, exactly what I wanted to achieve. Now, buckwheat does that well, but it does another thing for you. Buckwheat, when it grows in the soil, has the ability, because of acids on its roots, to extract insoluble phosphorus from the soil better than almost any other plant, and phosphorus is an important plant food. So once the buckwheat has taken it up and it's in the stems and tissues, once I come through here and turn this buckwheat into the soil, I've gotten three things accomplished at once. I've shaded out the weeds, I've increased the available phosphorus in the soil, and I've added all this nice organic matter, which couldn't be better.
This is a new little area that Elliot and I just created when we edged the driveway with these big stones. We backfilled with some fertile soil. We planted some native viburnums here. And it looks fine, but the ground is very bare. We need to put some ground cover in for visual reasons and also to cover the soil, keep it from eroding, keep the moisture in, just as nature was doing in those woods. Now, I'm going to try to read this landscape and see what's going on here already. Now, over here, there's an area that I'm not even going to touch. It's perfect just the way it is. There's an old stone wall covered with mosses. Ferns are coming up. Some of that bunchberry we saw over by the driveway, which is a beautiful plant. After those little white dogwood-like flowers are gone, and by the way, this is a low-growing shrubby dogwood, it's going to form bright red berries. Over here, there's something we didn't have over in the woods there. It's called twin flower. And it's a little trailing evergreen plant called twin flower because at the top of each wiry stem is a pair of little pink bells. And I'm certainly not going to do anything to disturb it. Now, I've noticed that over here, under the tree, we've got some more of that bunchberry coming up, along with some trailing stems of that twin flower and some tiny ferns. Now, if I were patient enough, I could wait, and they would probably spread throughout this bed. But I'm worried about the fact that the soil that filled this bed came from a place that was full of raspberries and grass, and I know they're going to sneak up on me if I don't cover this with a ground cover that will cover quite quickly. So I'm going to go with ferns. Now, I gave some thought to what ferns would do well here, because some like sun, a lot of them like shade, and a lot of them will tolerate partial sun, which is what we have here. Some sun sneaks in under the maple tree in the morning, some sun comes in at the late afternoon. In between, you have a sort of a filtered light situation. Now, we have some wonderful interrupted ferns out by the driveway that will take that kind of situation. Part sun as long as their roots are moist. They're called interrupted ferns because halfway up the stem, the fertile fronds that produce spores wither early in the summer and drop off, leaving an interrupted place. They're wonderful, but they get quite big. They might get almost as tall as I am. And I think that would overpower this site, and you'd sort of lose sight of the viburnum shrubs. So I'm going to plant a fern that gets about 2 feet tall, upright, lacy fronds called hay-scented fern. It covers very quickly, and I think it'll do beautifully. And I have a bag of a couple of dozen of them over here that I ordered from a nursery. If you've never planted dormant ferns before, you might be a little dismayed if you found something that looks like just a tangled mess of roots. What do I do with this? Which end is up? Well, if you look carefully, you'll see that there are little growth points here. And all you really need to do is take a digging fork, loosen up the soil, like that, in a little planting area. Take your fern, and then just set it in here. Many ferns have sort of pancake-like roots. Just put it in there so that those little tips are coming up. And then just be careful you remember where it is and don't walk on it. Now, I have a whole bunch of these, and I'm going to plant them about every 2 feet. And that'll give me coverage quite quickly. If you want to cover a big area and you don't have so many of them, you could plant them, say, every 3 or 4 feet apart. And before you know it, they would be fine. They'd just be making a carpet. But in between, you'd want to be pulling out any grass or weeds that come in, perhaps even apply a mulch. But don't cover the ferns too heavily right around their crowns there so that they can come up more easily. Now, over here, I'd like to have a little edging plant along these rocks. Now, sooner or later, the marching onslaught of hay-scented fern may crowd them out. But for now, I think I would like to have some of these little Labrador violets. Now, isn't this great? Look at the purple leaves on that. And if I just go like this, look how root bound that is. I'm actually going to pull that root system apart to open it up to the soil a little. There. Now, that's going to trail down between the cracks there. And I think if I plant these little guys about every, 6 or 8 inches, I'm going to have a beautiful little edging there and bright purple flowers to boot in spring. Here's another partly shaded area of the property where last year I established some flowering ground covers. Any one of them would be wonderful massed all by itself, but together they make a flowering tapestry. One of my favorites is these little May apples over here. Last year there were just 3 stems with those green umbrellas. Now there's over a dozen. And look at those wonderful little white nodding flowers underneath the umbrellas. This foam flower, which is an Appalachian wildflower, is doing great. It's sending out these shallow-rooted creeping runners and bearing frothy white flowers. And just look at the electric blue of this perennial forget-me-not. This blooms for a long time, too, weeks and weeks. And talk about long blooming. This fringed bleeding heart with the pink flowers and the lacy foliage will bloom from spring all the way through summer and into fall. Not many perennials you can say that about. And look how nice the foliage is contrasted with these violets, which were blooming a few weeks ago. And over here, this wild blue phlox, lavender blue, fragrant and makes wonderful clumps. And it'll self-sow, too. In front of it, I've got some ajuga edging this garden. Now, this is ajuga reptans, the creeping kind, and I'm afraid it's making great forays into my lawn. I probably should have planted the kind ajuga genevensis, which stays put in a tidy fashion. Next time, I'll know. Now, all of these will do well in part shade and prefer a moist, woodsy kind of soil. But what if you've got a situation which is hot, dry, and rather sandy soil? Well, I've got some suggestions for that over here. Come on, I'll show you. Over here on a sunnier edge of the border is some beach wormwood, or Artemisia stellarina. Now, it's a plant that naturally scrambles over sand dunes, and so it likes a hot, dry location with that wonderful white foliage. Gets a little straggly in late summer, but you can cut it back and it'll regrow right away. A little further down is lamb's ears. Now, this particular variety forms a nice low carpet, doesn't bloom, and just stays all woolly and silver in the front of the bed. Now, at the front of this bed here, very hot and dry because of this gravel reflecting off it, is a plant called Snow in Summer. Silvery foliage, and as an added plus, an avalanche of white blossoms, mixing in with this lovely red potentilla that's spilling into it, and the geranium himalayense right next door. But remember, all of these, like a warm, dry location, don't give them a moist, soggy one, or they'll only rot. This sweet little plant is called pussy toes, another gray-leaved mat-forming plant, little pink flowers that look just like kittens' paws. It also grows among rocks. It's a Rocky Mountain wildflower, in fact, and you can tuck it into rocky crevices. One form of it will even grow in lawns with little white flowers, very low growing. I sort of like having it when I find it in my lawn. Now, here's another great woolly-leaved plant that blooms. It's woolly yarrow, low-growing with a lovely mat of gray foliage and these glorious yellow flowers. Now, if you wanted a yellow that was less strong, there's a light yellow variety of it that's a little lower growing, a little more subtle. Looks beautiful next to that geranium Johnson's blue over there. And here's another very popular ground cover for growing among stones, paving stones of a terrace or something. This is a sedum. This particular one is called millions of different sedums that you can grow in a situation like this that will carpet the area. Dianthus, or pinks, is also one that people use a lot. This is going to spread out to form a mat with lovely blue-green foliage and pink flowers. I think my favorite ground cover for those low, stony places is creeping thyme. I especially like this woolly thyme with a soft gray mat. And this plant has covered this corner of the edging, spilling out into the path. in just about a year. And look how pretty it is when it starts to bloom at the beginning of the summer. It looks particularly nice with this alchemilla, or lady's mantle. Now, you might not think of this as a ground cover plant because it's a little on the tall side, but connecting a shrub border, giving some unity to a large area between shrubs, it would be wonderful. It self-sows, so after a while you'll have quite a few of them. The flowers which are coming out now are going to be yellow, and they're lovely, but I grow it as much for the leaves as anything else. Look what happens when I sprinkle water on it. Look how that beads up with raindrops or with dew. It's wonderful. The other day, Elliot asked me if this was grass growing in this part of the garden. Actually, it's a very nice ground cover, thread-leafed Coreopsis, Coreopsis verticillata rosea, a pink-flowered variety. It makes little tiny pink daisies about the size of a quarter with yellow centers. And it carpets the ground. This came from 3 small plants planted just about a year ago. Now, over here, this is a perennial geranium, a variety called Lancastriense, which also will make a spreading mass and can be used as a ground cover. I like these little pink-veined flowers, and they go very well in this corner of the garden with those volunteer Johnny jump-ups, tall purple lupins, and the chives that are blooming right now. Now, all of these ground cover plants are herbaceous. That means they die to the ground each winter and come back again in spring. But you know, there are shrubby ground covers you can grow as well. Often it's nice to have an evergreen ground cover. I particularly wanted one under this maple tree. I look out the house in the wintertime and see this area, and when there's no snow on the ground, it's nice to have something green. And I wanted something that would let the ground warm up soon in spring and let spring bulbs come up through it. And in fact, I had a lot of crocuses and scilla and grape hyacinths blooming here a few weeks ago. You can even see the spent foliage. And right now, I've even got some early summer alliums, member of the onion family, like those pink ones, or those blue ones over there. So I've chosen myrtle, also known as periwinkle, or botanically Vinca minor. This is a very popular ground cover, which does well in shade or in sun. I'm going to plant these about 10 inches apart. Now, people sometimes wonder how to figure out how many plants you need for a given area. Well, what I do is I take the total square footage and convert it into inches, so I have the total number of square inches in the whole area. Then I decide how close together, 10 inches, and how much space each plant will occupy. 10 inches by 10 inches is 100 square inches. So I'll just divide 100 into the total area, and I'll know how many plants I need. Now, with Vinca minor, I'm being very careful not to plant these too deep. They come in little bundles like this, and I'm putting the whole bundle in and just covering the roots. With some ground covers, like Pachysandra, you wouldn't have to worry about that. They'll root all along the stem. But these will rot if their stems are smothered. There we go. Now, these look a little dry, so I'm going to water this whole planting when I'm finished. But again, I'm going to be careful to prevent rot. So I'm not going to let a lawn sprinkler water them to death. I'm just going to trickle a hose through here. There. This should be a lovely carpet at any time of year. There's some tricks to maintaining a ground cover planting so that it looks better and grows better, too.
In the forest, there's a natural layer of old leaves and stems that keeps the soil from eroding and keeps the plant roots moister.
Yeah, I wish we had some shredded up leaves to go in this myrtle planting, Elliot.
Well, I started a pile of autumn leaves last year to rot into leaf mold, but since it takes 2 years, that won't be ready till next year. We're going to need a substitute.
So, meanwhile, since we don't have shredded up leaves, I bought some shredded bark, which will actually fill in quite well until this myrtle becomes a nice thick carpet. But since the stems of myrtle tend to rot if smothered, we're being very careful that we don't pile it right next to the clumps. There. This'll work out.
I think it'll do beautifully.
The other maintenance issue to keep in mind with ground covers is competition. Now, here at the edge of this bed, we have not maintained a very good edge, so the lawn grass is creeping in. And I think the best thing we should do here, Elliot, is to take up the woolly thyme mat, edge the bed properly with a sharp spade, remove all the grass, and then replant patches of thyme, and before you know it, I'll have my nice mat again.
It's a lot of work, but it would get the time back in
The only
shape.
way to do it. But, you know, we also have 3 ground covers that we planted here on purpose that are competing with each other for the space. The woolly thyme, this wintergreen, which is a shrubby ground cover that's sending up runners in the thyme quite successfully, and that ajuga.
Now, the way this ajuga is growing, it certainly is vigorous. If it were left alone, it would probably take over the whole area here. But since this is my garden, I can come in with a new factor, me, and I can decide that I want to cut it back. I want to have both thyme and ajuga. And I can come in and just cut these off, and the two will coexist. However, if I stop doing that, the ajuga is going to take over again. So maybe the best solution, if I want to have the thyme, is to take this out altogether.
That would be easier, wouldn't it? I'll just put it somewhere else where it can spread all by itself. Or I can plant that Ajuga genevensis I mentioned before, the variety that doesn't spread quite so rapidly. Elliot, come and see what's happening with this partridge berry.
Doesn't that look better? I felt so bad after I cut down that tree and destroyed the habitat for this plant that I went and dug up a part of it and put it here in the shade.
You know, he dug up a nice thick sod of it, set it here, and I've been keeping it well watered, and it should be creeping out here very well. Look, it's got little pink pairs of buds turning into little white flowers, to be followed by 2 bright red berries at the end of each stem.
This is a perfect example of putting the right plant in the right spot if you want it to grow well.
Always something you should keep in mind when you're choosing the right place for a plant in your garden. And so for now, goodbye and good gardening.
Next on TLC, doing something for your home can be easy, even fun. Check and see here on Homebodies. Then, add value to your home with some serious improvements. The Home Pro shows you how.